Hello everybody and welcome back to Let's Play Suzerain. So, let's go ahead and attend the Victory Day event. And let me get my timer started, so it's not minutes late. Sergey drove us to the city of Gen, the stronghold of Swordish nationalists, for an event organized by the opposition parties to discuss current events. In reality, it was probably a publicity stunt to show Sordland that the leaders of the assembly could sit around the same table. The National Front Party, which governed the city, undoubtedly had the biggest hand in the organization of the meeting. It was not a coincidence that it fell on Victory Day. Today was a day of special symbolic importance for Sordland. Every year on the 14th of March, proud patriots from all ages gathered to celebrate the end of the Swordish Civil War and Tarkin Sol's victory. Gen had survived one of the worst atrocities of the war, and its Victory Day celebrations were the most jubilant in all of Sordland. Originally, only Peter and I were scheduled to attend, but after learning about the new developments with the Ishval Urson case, Nia Morgna was invited as well. Representatives from both the PFJP and NFP had told us they wanted to talk about the case in more detail. Nia departed whole sword first. Peter and I left on our own a little later. Peter was sitting next to me in the presidential car, skimming through the morning newspaper in silence. Suddenly, Sergey rolled down the soundproof window. "Mr. President, Mr. Vice President, we are about to arrive at the Gen Center of Culture. Miss Morgna had already arrived and she'll be waiting for you. Is it really a great idea to have both the President and Vice President in the same limo?" I feel like it isn't, for being completely honest. Peter raised his head to look out the window. He folded the newspaper and laid it beside him. Wow, that was too comfortable of a drive to have been this fast. "How are you today, Sergey?" "I'm just fine, sir. It makes me proud to be driving the two most important men in Sordland on Victory Day. The three most important men are right here in this car, Sergey." Sergey took a left turn and drove through the tiny streets of Gen. The city looked surprisingly clean and well maintained. There was no sign of the destruction the city suffered during one of the heaviest battles of the Civil War. We slowed down in front of a colorful plaza overlooking a massive concrete building with a giant sign that read Gen Center of Culture. Looks like the NFP mayors have really transformed the city. Wasn't this an abandoned warehouse for the longest time? I believe it used to function as a rebel militia base during and a little while after the Civil War. Oh right, the Black Battalion. It's been a while since I've heard that name, so I had to bring it up. May it never be spoken again. Sergey stopped the car and went outside to hold our doors. "Here we are, sirs. I hope you have a great day." We got out of the car and walked towards the entrance of the building. Every spot around us was decorated with the flags of Sordland. The comically large amount of flags almost fully enveloped the building around the plaza in maroon, white, and gold. At the entrance, Kasaro Kibnir, the head of the National Front Party, was waiting for us in his iconic brown suit, watching the sky. Look at this guy, so full of himself. How did this clown convince the PFJP to have trilateral talks with them anyway? "He's a dangerously competent man, Peter. We should be cautious with him." I agree. Seeing us arrive, Kasaro approached us with a smile. "Thank you for being here on this glorious day, Mr. President and Mr. Vice President. As the former mayor of Gen, it is an honor to welcome you to this fine city." "Looks like you were a good mayor. Maybe you should think about running for local office again." "Thanks for the kind words, but I'm sure I'll do an even better job as president. Besides, as you can see, our current mayor doesn't need my help." We shook hands. "Thank you for organizing this, Mr. Kibnir. The representatives of the PFJP and Mr. Morgna are already inside the private meeting room. Hopefully we'll be finished before the festivities start." Kasaro gestured at the doors behind him. "Shall we?" "Please, just follow me." We entered the building and walked through a massive conference hall until we approached a door towards the back of the building. "We'll have the meeting here." Casaro opened the doors for us and we entered the meeting room. PFJP leader Franz Richter and his deputy Manoli Suhil was already seated at the left side of the table. As soon as we entered, Nia came to greet us. After showing our seats, Casaro sat down next to his deputy, Remus Hallström. This is such a meaningful day. Thank you for coming here on behalf of your parties. But despite the festive atmosphere, we in the PFJP want to raise a few important concerns about the worrying state of affairs in Sordland. Casaro stopped for a moment to check his notes. Very worrying indeed. Mr. Richter and his analysts have been working on an analysis of the blood problem. As soon as they brought it up, we gave our support without reservations. The blood problem? Mr. Holt, I'm sorry to interrupt, but the analysis is about racism and radicalization in Sordland, and our main topic is the case of Urson v. Sordland. Please don't try to spin it. Of course, Miss Suhil. Mr. Hallström just wanted to point out that this analysis was focused mainly on topics related to the Bludish people. I refuse to discuss this topic without any Bludish representation. Actually, Mr. President is completely right. Hold up, guys. Let's hear them out first. We are representing the parties of the assembly here. We did invite the representative of the Workers' Party of Bludia to join us, but they refused. Another proof they have a different agenda. If they were genuinely concerned for the plight of their people, they would have come today. But their people shouldn't worry. The Sordish patriots are here to defend them instead. I will hear you out, but know that I will not act on anything before talking to the representatives of the Bludish community. Let's get back on track, ladies and gentlemen, he gestured at friends. I want to give the word to Mr. Richter to explain the issue. Thank you. Our analysis of the current tensions between the Bludish and Sordish population in Sordland displays a worrying picture. As much as I hate to say it, the threat of the Bludish Freedom Front is getting real again. The situation with Rumburg and Wayland is very concerning. The increasingly discriminatory actions of the governor of Bergia are resulting in the radicalization of many young Bludish people. Distressingly, the number of radicals have increased significantly after Wayland's Operation Bear Trap. I must also point out that the recruitment numbers of the BFF have significantly increased within Nurist communities. Peter frantically looked through his papers. That is correct. The reports show that 39 Nurist sanctuaries in Bergia are now classified as red threats by the authorities. Many priests in the region are also suspected of having ties to the BFF. The Religious Harmony Bill would have directly crippled this network they established within our sanctuaries. As the threat the BFF poses is a direct one, this issue requires direct actions that would bear direct results. I'm disappointed by the lack of action taken by the USP administration. Your bill would have made everything worse. You did well by vetoing it, Mr. President. Our suggestion is to finally enforce the official language of our country as stated in the Constitution. We are working on the Unified Language Act. It is directly aimed at the breeding grounds of the Bludish Freedom Front. The police have infiltrated 32 BFF training grounds in remote towns around Bergia that posed as middle schools. Despite all the evidence, similar schools keep popping up. And so-called activists are constantly blocking Governor Braun's attempts to stop these schools, claiming he is attacking their right to language. You can't take away the Bludish people's right to be educated in their own language. This is insane. Please read the proposal carefully. It does not take away anyone's rights. It only gives the state a way to control the radicalization in these schools that teach Bludish nationalist propaganda. And according to the Constitution, the language of Sordland is Sordish. If nothing is being done to enforce that, we are breaching the Constitution. This law simply enforces it. With all due respect, Mr. Kibnir, this bill is not strong enough. The Bludish language should be completely banned. You know people like Miss Sohail or Miss Morgna will never even vote for your watered-down bill. Remus. Casaro repositioned himself on his chair and continued. True, it does not ban Bludish language or Bludish education. It will instead make Sordish mandatory to learn for everyone living in this country. This will only decrease the tensions in the long term. Really? That's a fair point. However, the wording of the bill is far too vague to work as intended. It gives the government too much power over educational institutes. I disagree. The language is quite clear and it is in line with the Constitution. But we can still improve it, of course. It is true that it gives more control, but it is a necessary compromise. I don't see how this helps with the situation. It doesn't. It's simple as that. The PFJP will not allow this bill to pass the Assembly. Let's not make statements that the party hasn't agreed on yet. Manoli looked furious. She opened her mouth to respond, then read the room and closed it again. As if the PFJP has the influence to change the outcome. I mean, they kind of do. They're literally the second largest party in the Assembly. The only thing they would need to do to block it from passing the Assembly is get a handful of USP supporters, and we already know that the USP has a sort of progressive wing to it. So they've got people they could persuade to vote against the bill, thus blocking it from even reaching us in the first place. If I may continue with our analysis, the situation is also connected to Runeberg. As everybody already knows, in the case of a future incursion, BFF forces on Sordland could become an existential threat. One point I need to mention is that we are already working on removing the authority of the governor. That's surprising, but great to hear. We have to do something about it because the reality is the secessionists are on the rise. He adjusted his tie and continued. That makes dealing with the armed militants crucial in the short term. I'll be honest, I myself have underestimated this threat. But judging by the current climate, a spark is all the BFF needs to start violence on a mass scale again. Our analysis matches with what the Ministry of Interior shared with us, but despite this fact, we believe the Ministry is hiding information from us, which is actively fueling the tensions behind the scenes. As much as I now support a strict response against the BFF, it also must be coupled with the expansion of rights for the Brutish people. This is the only way to fight against radicalism. That is BFF propaganda. What rights are we talking about here? What can a sword in Sordland do that a blood cannot? You were using soft language as a cover-up for your willingness to negotiate with terrorists. You are a BFF apologist, Mr. Richter. Remus shouted the last sentence. Peter tapped on the table to get his attention. Please don't raise your voice, Mr. Holstrom. The mood in the room had turned sour. Is the USP that desperate for Mr. Richter's support now? Manoli bellowed out a loud laugh. Mr. Vectorn is the last person to sway the BFJP. What is that supposed to mean? Can we return to the topic? Cassara and Peter nodded. You heard the man. Please finish your point, Mr. Richter. Yes. Our administration should take all possible opportunities to expand the rights of our brutish populace while stamping out the BFF militants in parallel. This must be the long-term strategy. However, we require your support with a more pressing matter. This might have very significant consequences for our brutish citizens and may serve as a dangerous trigger if we're not careful. Friends gestured at Manoli, who carefully placed several pieces of paper in front of her. Mr. President, Mr. Vice President, and Miss Minister, as you already know, there is a major Supreme Court case at the moment. Ishval Urson is suing the governor of Bergia, Felix Braun, for infringing upon the liberties of brutish people and demands that the Constitution be revised. Because of the argument and the implications, Felix Braun, and consequently the very Constitution of Sordland, is under trial. The fact is, he needs to be punished and the Constitution must be reviewed. We already mentioned this before, but I guess we reiterate. I'm already aware of this case. In fact, we are already working on revoking the current special zone status of Bergia. That's great to hear. We would be very happy if you can share the details once they're more concrete. We will definitely give support to that when the time comes, Mr. President. However, the case of Ishval Urson has a bigger reach than Bergia. Nia raised her hand and spoke. I was actively involved in this case. Because of the implications with the Constitution, there is no way the Supreme Court will agree with Ishval Urson on all of the points. Not if all three parties of the Assembly support Urson together. We can put pressure on them, and we only need them to agree on a few of those points. All parties? Is the NFP really willing to support Urson, Mr. Kibnir? For peace and harmony in Sordland, yes, but perhaps we must clarify the details first. Okay, what is the significance of this case? Technically, we already know this, but I guess we'll reiterate it. I'll be straight with you, Mr. President. If the court rules against Urson, this will most likely turn into a BFF campaign for a bluish revolution. We are asking everybody to recognize this. I and the NFP are ready to push for a de-escalation and aid our nation during this dangerous time. I'll be completely honest. I would never have expected that from you. Remus was visibly annoyed, but kept himself silent. Because the case is now in the hands of the Supreme Court, this ruling will influence all future implementation of the law and the decision-making of the lower courts. We have the Minister of Justice here with us too. I'm sure she would not disagree with what I just said. Nia did not comment, but nodded. I'm afraid Mr. Kibnir is right about this. If the court ignores this case now, this may turn into something massive. Therefore, we have to pressure the court not to escalate the already high tensions. What do you really think will happen if the court ignores it? Another all-out BFF rebellion, Mr. President? In my opinion, that would be the preferred outcome. If enemies do truly live within our borders, I'd rather have them show their true faces earlier than later. This is exactly what those damn Rums want. They are readying for war and waiting to use the tensions inside Sordland against us. Let's see. We can't allow that to happen. We definitely can't. Okay, what is the most likely outcome of this case? The first and most likely option is that the Supreme Court completely ignores the arguments and rejects it in its entirety. If they ignore all of the points and strike against Urson, Governor Braun will be free to follow his discriminatory policies without any obstacles. And in a possible future case, the court's interpretation of the Urson case will be the basis of all future rulings, which opens the way of suspending the rights of non-swords. It would effectively erase any progress that has been made regarding bluish rights and will embolden anti-bluish proponents to follow their actions freely. That'd be disastrous for our bluish citizens. Exactly. That is precisely why our expectation is to see a different result this time. The stakes couldn't be higher. Okay, what are your plans and suggestions? In short, the plan is to release a unified statement to the justices declaring our support for Urson and explaining why this is so important. The only result would be if the Supreme Court reiterates its commitment to the Pillar of Unity in Soulism. Mr. President, despite previously being against it, I now completely understand why Sordland still needs Soulism. We need unity more than ever. You were previously against that? Really? I find that hard to believe. And Article 6 is that unity. We do not need Solist unity. Pissarro stared Remus down and continued. Okay, you guys have infighting evidently within your party, so that's not great for you. If the court reiterates the definition of sword in Article 6 as an all-encompassing term, that would be acknowledging that Urson and the others like him are indeed protected by the rights of the sword's people, which they are. As a result, the resettlement policy in Deer would be reversed, opening the way for Governor Braun's removal and the de-escalation of tensions in Bergia. Is that true, Miss Morgana? That is correct, Mr. President. Doesn't that mean the existence of the bluish people is literally not being acknowledged? Exactly, our current constitution fails to recognize the bluish people. It is time to abolish the inherent racism in it. The citizens of Sordland are swords. The constitution clearly defines that in Article 6. It encompasses everybody. This shouldn't be up for debate. What racism are you talking about? Solum is based on civic nationalism, not ethnic. I do not understand why someone would go against such a broad and inclusive law. I don't see the commies criticizing their identity contanen when in fact that country is filled with different ethnicities. Why are you even comparing Sordland with United Cantana? Are you alright, Mr. Kibnir? Very funny, Mr. President. My point is, people like the Maliniv do not call themselves Kiovan over Contanen. Why is it that Bloods cannot do the same? Why does Sordland have to be divided? You have a point, but I must point out that Cantana is the word for a geographic entity, unlike Sword. This is Sordland. You can subscribe to whatever idea you want, but if you are a citizen, you are a sword. This is how nations work. The reality is that Bloods do not respect nor recognize the laws and authority of Sordland. They'd rather separate themselves from swords and protest the very laws that protect them, so that they can cry about injustice and ask Sordland's enemies to come and save them. I personally do not agree with the Bloods or Swords solist crap. I can't believe the words being thrown around at this meeting. And what is the position of the PFJP? I personally somewhat agree with Mr. Kibnier on this. However, our position as the PFJP is that Article 6 does indeed discriminate against non-swords, and having a positive outcome for this case alone doesn't suffice. We agree to come together in support of Ishval Urson, but we believe our statement should include the acknowledgement of the inherent racism within the Constitution. We must use this opportunity to show the flaws in the Constitution. If the court agrees that there is in fact conflict between the articles or recognize the and the Hawker Court is going to listen to that? Besides, we do not agree with your inherent racism hogwash. You have to state that it is your party's opinion and does not reflect the NFP. We won't take part in that. And that would make the statement look weak and disorganized. If there's no consistent strategy, I don't think it would work. I think I have enough information to be able to say we are deep in the mud here. Peter laughed at his own joke attempt, but nobody else reacted. Well, I think the NFP's stance could do some good for the Bluedish without provoking the establishment, but even that might be risky before the vote. But the PFJP's stance is too radical. I think it will only antagonize the Supreme Court even further and make them give a worse ruling. I think it might be better to keep our administration out of this. I'm not sure if it's worth the risk right before the vote for our reforms. We might lose all of our progress, but the decision is yours. Let's see. Tell me why we should pressure the court to admit discrimination within the Constitution. Because it is the right thing to do, Mr. President. Now is not the time for weak and superficial actions. We can show the people of Sordland the reality of the situation and create a precedent for a future constitutional amendment of these articles. And the NFP is willing to join with that statement. No, we are willing to give our support for Urson for the violation of his right to property, but if you're going to go this way, we have to make two separate statements. And how do you think the Supreme Court will react if we do it our way? Or if we do it your way? We have to try. If they truly care for the people, they will agree to it. If not, people will see the reality of the soulless state apparatus. What do you think, Peter? Peter leaned in and whispered, I don't think this would work, Anton. The court won't be influenced, plus it will further antagonize them against our reforms. We will definitely lose votes. In my opinion, the PFJP has the most to gain from this. They would be seen as the leaders of this table, not us. And what do you suggest we do, Miss Morgna? Nia leaned in and whispered, I agree with Mr. Richter and Miss Suhail. I personally think we should join them in their statement. But I also agree that Chief Justice Hawker won't have a sudden change of heart because of it. I think I've made my own position clear. However, you know about the current political reality. In the end, it is your decision. Okay, and why should we convince them to reiterate their position on Article 6? Because it's the only way to decrease tensions, and the Supreme Court can't afford to look hypocritical, so they'll have to take the soulless side. I still think this is admitting defeat against soulism, but Mr. Kibnier is right. The Roomberg situation demands extraordinary measures, and is the PFJP willing to join in with that statement? As much as I don't agree with it, we are willing to compromise and join in. But if you're going to go this way, we will still need to make our separate statement as party policy. Manoli was shaking in her seat in fury, but managed to keep herself silent. And how do you think the Supreme Court will react if you do it your way? I truly believe they will be convinced it is not against their ideology, and that is what Colonel Sol intended with the Constitution. We'll be shooting them with their own guns. Just imagine, all the parties of the Assembly are reminding them of their duty with their own beloved Constitution. Mr. Hawker can't take that pressure. What do you think, Peter? I think this is risky, Anton, but if it works, which it actually might, it could make a big difference. If the court really feels the pressure and accepts it, the lower courts will need to adhere to their interpretation, It might not get rid of legal discrimination, but it could at least decrease it. If we're looking to reduce tensions with the British people, that's one way to do it, but with the vote on our reforms coming so soon, it's a real leap of faith. What about you, Miss Morgna? I definitely do not agree with Mr. Kibney or Mr. Holstern. I don't see Solism unity working in reality, but I also have to say that pushing this position will likely have a real effect on the outcome of the case. Mr. Hawker can agree with the traditional Solis interpretation after all. However, as long as our law enforcement forces are filled with anti-Blood officers, I don't believe the change on the ground will be so visible. Okay, I think I've heard enough. Reality is, neither choice is particularly great. I don't think there's much we can do in that regard to assist with it, if I'm completely honest. I really don't think there's much we can do in that regard. Just double checking out of curiosity. Yeah, no real info there. Option 1 here probably results in an increase in British opinion of us. However, it probably hurts our chances of getting our reforms passed in the Supreme Court. Although I'm trying to, I believe, I don't know if we'll be able to do it though, because I think you might have needed to increase funding on the law enforcement. But if I recall correctly, there is an event at some point where you get some information regarding one of the old guard justices, and you can choose to basically use it to get their support in favor of passing your reforms. But I think you might have to, like I said, provide additional funding to the law enforcement to be able to get that, so I'm not certain if we'd be able to use it. In fact, I don't think we would be able to. I just don't know for certain. I'm inclined to take the compromise route. We could always revise things further down the road, is my opinion. Of course, the reality of the situation is we probably wouldn't be able to. Do I just want to risk it though? No, I think we're going to take the compromise option. The USP will join the statement. We will argue that British people are considered swords before the law, as Mr. Kibney suggested. That's great to hear. We will get to work immediately after the celebrations. I don't like the sound of this. Neither do I. As much as it may be needed, this will only strengthen the solism of the USP. We are all now sortists, but we all know sortists don't agree with Solis nationalism. We'll talk about that later, Remus. Sortists will have to listen to me this time. We will also support the effort for the sake of a positive result. We appreciate all your comments, ladies and gentlemen, but now that the USP's stance is clear, we should probably end the meeting here. After bidding our farewells, Casaro took us outside the building to join the Victory Day event on the plaza. We got our sale results. Oh shit, we got a green bar. Okay, so we got high returns, not very high returns, so not the absolute best. If we had gotten very high returns, we would have gotten a +6 to the governmental budget. But getting a +4 is fine. That gets us not necessarily back in the black, but it's better than -12. Foreign investments in coal surge. Following the recent amendment to the Energy Production Act, Morna has experienced a surge in foreign investments in the coal sector. The softened regulations have invited an influx of overseas capital, providing a much-needed boost to Lauren's struggling coal industry. This development holds promising prospects for the sector's revival and the local economy. Wonderful. See, the big three unite against Governor Braun. I'm not going to read this whole thing. You can pause if you wish to read it. And then the last little bit there at the bottom. Gasum investment, a boon for Sordland. Our government's hefty investment in Gasum has proven successful, bringing newfound stability to our domestic energy sector. This decisive action from the government has not only saved one of the biggest energy companies from a financial downfall, but also solidified Sordland's commitment to supporting its industries. The investment has set Gasum back on track and has showcased how the government's strategic moves can bring prosperity to the nation. High profits from Gasum divestment. Sordland's recent divestment from Gasum has brought high returns to the state treasury, reaffirming the efficacy of market-oriented decision-making. With this shrewd divestment, the government has successfully capitalized on the market conditions, providing a much-needed influx of capital to our treasury. This maneuver demonstrates a competent understanding of market dynamics and the potential for well-informed decisions to stimulate financial growth. And then this is also... Yep, Radical's not exactly happy about us displaying our commitment to solism. But again, I just don't think we would have been too successful going all the way. I do love that this is a green bar though now. That's great for us. Chapter 3, Victims of Changes. Let's see, what do we have in the news starting out? Heart to break for FC Enrica as FC Gelsord secures back-to-back league titles. Okay, this is some football club, so soccer. World ignores the Blutish plight. I mean, we're not trying to. Volgish man shot after burning Agnolian flag. The Helgeland protests that started against the governor who was appointed by the Agnolian government are continuing without slowing down after the supportive statements by Chancellor Emmerich Hegel. The Volgish protesters assembled in front of the governor's office in Helgeport and waved Volkslandian flags. One Volgish protester was photographed as he climbed the flagpole of the governor's office and brought down the Agnolian flag. He was shot by the Agnolian authorities on the island when he attempted to burn the flag with gasoline. Protesters claim he was shot in the neck and was killed immediately on the scene, while the Agnolian government has not released any statement about the subject. The incident sparked further unrest and protests turned into riots around the island. Many Volgish protesters are now calling for Volksland to save them. Chancellor Hegel was quick to respond to the incident, saying Volksland stands together with her people in Helgeland. No regime can murder its citizens because they protested. If this conflict continues, Volksland holds the right to intervene to save her people. Now, that's not exactly something we want to hear. BFF recruitment. Okay. See how that goes. Do I want to do it? Got 11 minutes left on my clock. I don't think I really do. We're going to go and end this part here. And next part, we will respond to this call from Marcel Caronti and see how that goes. But until next time, goodbye and farewell.